Please subscribe to my channel and like my video. Thank you for your support. Stories 1. He was one of Europe's lesser-known serial killers, Heinrich Bauer. Born in 1874 in the small town of Ebersberg, Germany, Heinrich was the son of a family with 3 children. His family made a living through farming in the region. His siblings had moved to France, but Heinrich stayed in Ebersberg. At the age of 15, he had an accident while working in the fields that would profoundly affect his life. Heinrich became epileptic, experiencing frequent seizures and blackouts. People pitied him and tried to support him, even calling him crazy. Later, when his family abandoned him, he started living alone with few friends. Years later, he got married for the first time, but his wife left him shortly after. After his first marriage, Bauer married again and had children this time. However, whatever was happening inside the house led his wives to leave him, and he was abandoned again one night. The truth would come to light shortly after. In 1902, Heinrich was working at a construction site. There, he invited a friend named Hans to his home. After some conversation and alcohol, Heinrich tried to sexually assault Hans. Hans resisted, but Heinrich had already lost his temper. Heinrich then attacked Hans with a hatchet found in the house. After knocking Hans unconscious with hatchet blows, Heinrich, in shock, realized Hans was dead and began planning to bury him. Heinrich buried Hans's body under the house and returned to his normal life without anyone noticing. This was his first murder, and he thought he had successfully covered up his crime. Heinrich, emboldened by his first murder, became more dangerous. He became more careful and methodical. At this point, Heinrich's dark side fully emerged. Feeling more confident, he became bolder in choosing his victims. Heinrich typically targeted people who were alone at the tavern. A few months after his first victim, he set his sights on a young worker named Friedrich. Friedrich had recently moved to the town, and Heinrich started a conversation with him. One night, Heinrich invited Friedrich to his home. Friedrich, trusting Heinrich's friendly demeanor, accepted the invitation. However, Friedrich was unaware of the horror awaiting him. Heinrich killed Friedrich and buried his body under his house. This was Heinrich's second murder and a turning point for him. Heinrich had now made killing a habit. The murders Heinrich committed were increasing. His victims included new workers in the town, archaeologists, and even tourists visiting the area. Heinrich became more skilled with each murder, leaving no trace of his victims. After killing his victims, he buried their bodies under his house and continued his normal life without anyone noticing. Heinrich specifically targeted foreigners who came to the town due to the archaeological excavations. In 1903, he met an archaeological team from England. William, one of the archaeologists, caught Heinrich's attention. Heinrich invited William to his home one evening. While conversing, Heinrich drugged William's drink. Once William was unconscious, Heinrich coldly killed him and buried him under his house. This murder proved that Heinrich had begun targeting foreigners. Heinrich's murders were becoming increasingly brutal. In 1905, a new family moved to town, and Heinrich targeted their young son, Jacob. Jacob, trusting Heinrich's friendly demeanor, went to his home. However, Heinrich subjected Jacob to horrific torture before killing him. Heinrich buried Jacob's body under his house as well. Jacob's disappearance caused great fear in the town. Heinrich's growing confidence led him to make more complex plans. One day, he met a new doctor who had moved to town with his family. The doctor's wife, Maria, and young daughter, Elise, caught Heinrich's attention. Heinrich approached the family with a friendly demeanor and gained their trust. Heinrich invited Maria to his home for tea one day. Maria, accepting Heinrich's polite invitation, went to his house. However, Heinrich killed Maria and buried her body under his house. Maria's disappearance shocked the town, and the police began investigating Heinrich. In 1907, things began to change with the appointment of a new commissioner to Ebersberg. Commissioner Friedrich immediately started working through the files. He was determined to find the missing people. How could 12 people have disappeared in such a small place? More importantly, among the missing were 2 French archaeologists and 3 German technicians. Investigating the recorded incidents revealed that they were all between 45 and 55 years old. They had all last been seen either at the tavern or the market. Commissioner Friedrich interviewed the families of the missing, asking if they had any enemies, but these interviews yielded no results. Commissioner Friedrich was new to Ebersberg, so his identity was not yet known to anyone outside the police. He decided to spend time at the tavern, one of the last places the missing people had been seen. This way, he might encounter suspicious individuals. One day, the man he was waiting for walked in. A slightly hunched man with his head down entered. The commissioner decided to stay a little longer after seeing the man. The man sat alone, sipping his beer and making eye contact with the commissioner. The commissioner became suspicious and sensed something, so he went to the police station and requested an investigation into this man. The investigation revealed that Heinrich Bauer was one of the workers at the archaeological excavations. The commissioner began having Heinrich followed. After days of surveillance, Heinrich did nothing out of the ordinary. This frustrated the commissioner. One day, a woman from Ebersberg came to the police station, reporting that she had not heard from her husband for a while. The commissioner requested that Heinrich be brought to the station. The commissioner planned to ask a few questions and then release him. Heinrich arrived at the station and sat down, pulling out some dried grapes from his pocket and starting to eat. The woman's gaze changed instantly, and she said her husband had taken dried grapes with him when he left the house. Seizing this opportunity, the commissioner ordered a search of Heinrich Bauer's home. When the teams arrived at the house, they found the missing person's watch and a blood-stained garment. But these were not enough. One of the officers searching the house noticed a raised area on the floor. With the commissioner's approval, they lifted the floorboards and began digging. The horror began as they dug. Lifeless bodies started to emerge, all buried in the fetal position. Heinrich was literally sitting on top of a graveyard. That night, during the excavations that lasted until morning, the bodies of 7 people were discovered. While the police were conducting excavations at the house, the commissioner was interrogating Heinrich, but he was not confessing, frequently having epileptic seizures and passing out. While investigating Heinrich Bauer, Commissioner Friedrich discovered that he had changed residences 3 times. He wondered why Heinrich had moved 3 times in a small place like Ebersberg. Subsequently, he ordered investigations at the other residences. The real horror scenes were now unfolding. Bodies were emerging from under every house they dug up. As the digging continued, the total number of bodies reached 15. People who saw bodies emerging from under their homes had nervous breakdowns, and the local community was experiencing terrible moments. When the number of bodies reached 15, Heinrich Bauer confessed to everything and was sent to prison. Bauer was arrested, and his sentence would be determined after the evidence was collected. However, one morning, the guards found Heinrich Bauer had hanged himself in his cell. Known as the Ebersberg Monster, Bauer was no more. No one from his family claimed his body, and he was buried in a pauper's grave. In 1930, exactly 23 years later, construction work was being carried out in someone's garden in Ebersberg. As the garden was being dug up, one of the workers came across something very strange, a skull. Everyone was in shock. There was something illegal in the garden, and the owner didn't even understand what was happening before notifying the police. When the police arrived at the scene, They continued digging, eventually finding a total of 8 bodies. When asked how long the owner had had the house, they said they had owned it for a very long time and had rented it out during that period. The case, which had been closed 23 years ago, was reopened. Europe's least known serial killer came to light thanks to the remains found in 1930. The Ebersberg monster, Heinrich Bauer, was exactly this kind of person. Stories 2. The Lovelorn Killer. Hans Meyer was a man of many faces. Born in 1885 in a quaint town near Munich, Germany, he grew up amidst the lush greenery and serene landscapes of the Bavarian countryside. Hans was the middle child in a family of 5 children, raised in a household that outwardly epitomized respectability and success. His father was a prominent businessman, known for his integrity and acumen, while his mother was a pillar of the local community, revered for her charity work and gentle demeanor. From a young age, Hans displayed an uncanny ability to charm and manipulate those around him. He had an infectious smile, piercing blue eyes that seemed to look right into a person's soul, and a way with words that could disarm even the most skeptical individual. To his friends and family, he was the golden boy, handsome, intelligent, and destined for greatness. But beneath this beguiling facade lurked a darkness that would eventually reveal itself in the most horrifying ways. Hans's childhood was marked by subtle, yet significant incidents that hinted at his true nature. He would often be found alone, lost in thought, or engaging in peculiar activities. Once, a neighbor's cat went missing, only to be found days later in a gruesome state. Hans had been seen playing with the cat shortly before its disappearance, but no one could believe that the sweet boy they knew could be responsible for such cruelty. These incidents were brushed aside as mere coincidences, but they were the early signs of the malevolence that lay dormant within him. As Hans grew older, his charm became his most potent weapon. He learned to use his looks and eloquence to get what he wanted, whether it was the admiration of his peers or the affections of the women around him. By the time he reached adulthood, he had perfected the art of deceit, becoming a master at hiding his true intentions behind a mask of affability. In 1908, Hans decided to leave his small town and move to Munich, seeking the excitement and opportunities of the city. There, he quickly ingratiated himself with the local elite, attending lavish parties and mingling with influential figures. It was at one of these gatherings that he met Anna, a stunning young woman and the daughter of a wealthy merchant. Hans was immediately drawn to her, not just by her beauty, but by the challenge she represented. Winning her over would be a testament to his seductive prowess. Anna was captivated by Hans's charm and sophistication. He courted her with a relentless passion, showering her with gifts and attention, and within 6 months, they were married in a grand ceremony that the whole city talked about. To the outside world, they were the perfect couple, but behind closed doors, a different story was unfolding. Hans's love quickly turned dark. He became possessive and paranoid, convinced that Anna was unfaithful. His jealousy knew no bounds, and he began to isolate her from her family and friends. The first signs of his brutality emerged one night when he accused Anna of infidelity. He tied her to a chair in their cellar and subjected her to hours of torture, demanding she confess to imagined affairs. He used a variety of methods, including whips and branding irons, leaving her with horrific scars. When Anna finally succumbed to her injuries, Hans meticulously dismembered her body and buried the pieces in different locations around their property. He carefully chose places where no one would suspect, such as under the chicken coop and in the flower beds. By 1912, Hans had moved to Berlin, seeking a fresh start. There, he met Maria, a vivacious and independent woman who worked as a seamstress. Hans was captivated by her spirit and independence, seeing her as a new challenge. He wooed her with gifts and attention, and soon they were married. Hans's dark side resurfaced soon after their marriage. He accused Maria of undermining his authority and began a campaign of psychological torture. He isolated her, monitored her every move, and eventually resorted to physical violence. Hans took sadistic pleasure in her suffering, prolonging her agony for weeks before finally ending her life. He disposed of her body by dismembering it and scattering the parts in the nearby forest. Hans took extra precautions, ensuring that the pieces were spread far enough apart to avoid detection. In 1915, Hans moved again, this time to Vienna. He met Clara at a cafe, where she worked as a waitress. Clara was kind-hearted and compassionate, traits that Hans found irresistible. They were married within a year, and Hans seemed to have found happiness once more. But history repeated itself. Hans's jealousy and paranoia took over, and he began to torment Clara. He would lock her in the basement for days, depriving her of food and water, only to release her and pretend nothing was wrong. When Clara tried to escape, Hans caught her and subjected her to a final, gruesome session of torture. He used needles, knives, and other implements to inflict maximum pain without killing her immediately. He disposed of her body by burning it in the furnace of an abandoned factory. The intense heat left no trace of Clara, making it nearly impossible for anyone to find out what had happened to her. Hans relocated to Paris in 1920, where he met Sophie, an aspiring actress. Sophie's beauty and ambition captivated Hans, and he courted her with an intensity she found intoxicating. They married after a whirlwind romance. Sophie's fate was sealed the moment they wed. Hans's possessiveness reached new heights. He installed locks on all the windows and doors, effectively imprisoning her in their home. When Sophie resisted his control, Hans began to physically and mentally torture her. He used implements of torture he'd acquired over the years, savoring her pain and fear. He kept Sophie alive for weeks, enjoying her suffering before finally ending her life. He disposed of her body by dismembering it and dumping the remains in the Seine River. Hans carefully weighted down the body parts to ensure they would not resurface. By 1925, Hans had moved to London. There, he met Elise, a schoolteacher who was captivated by his charm and intelligence. Hans proposed within months, and they were married in a small ceremony. Elise's end was perhaps the most tragic. Hans manipulated her into thinking she was going insane. He would gaslight her, moving objects around the house and denying it, making strange noises in the night, and even staging break-ins. Elise's mental state deteriorated rapidly under the stress, and Hans took advantage of her vulnerability. He tortured her for weeks, keeping her on the brink of death, until finally ending her misery. He buried her body in a remote area of the English countryside, choosing a secluded spot in the woods that he thought no one would ever find. Hans's final marriage was to Greta in 1930. They met in Amsterdam, where Hans had settled under a new identity. Greta was a widow with a small inheritance, and Hans saw an opportunity. He charmed her with tales of his past adventures and promises of a bright future together. They were married within a few months. Greta, like the others, fell victim to Hans's sadistic tendencies. He isolated her from her family, convincing her that they disapproved of their marriage. Hans began to inflict psychological and physical torture, relishing her suffering. He kept her alive for months, using her as a means to fulfill his darkest desires. Hans used more elaborate methods with Greta, including electrocution and waterboarding, finding new ways to extend her agony. When he finally decided to end her life, he dismembered her body and buried the parts in different locations around their home, just as he had done with his first wife. In 1932, Greta's disappearance sparked an investigation. Her family, suspicious of Hans, reported their concerns to the police. An investigator named Inspector Reinhardt took on the case. Reinhardt began to dig into Hans's past, uncovering a trail of missing women who had all been married to him. Reinhardt's investigation led him to the grim discoveries at Hans's former residences. The buried remains of Anna, Clara, and Elise, the scattered body parts of Maria and Sophie, and the bones of Greta told a horrific tale. Each location revealed more about Hans's sadistic nature and his meticulous methods of disposal. Hans was arrested and tried for his crimes. The court was shocked by the extent of his brutality, and he was sentenced to life imprisonment. Hans Meyer, the lovelorn killer, spent the rest of his days in a solitary cell, reliving the horrors he had inflicted on the women he claimed to love. His story became a cautionary tale, a dark reminder of how love can turn into a monstrous obsession. Thank you for listening.